Benjamin von Wong never set out to be a photographer, and he became one almost by accident. Nevertheless, in the space of the last 5 years since he quit his day job as a mining engineer, he's earned a worldwide reputation as a brilliantly original photographic artist, and was even named one of 4 winners of this year's Imaging Alliance Award for Visionary Photographers. I've admired Ben for a long time now, and I'm so excited that he's my guest on the show today. Ben creates these fantastical visual worlds through photography, and it's usually kind of centered around virally promoting worthy causes. He then posts these images and usually behind-the-scenes videos around those on his website and on YouTube so that people can experience the process in a visceral way. He's really well known for creating work that looks hyper-realistic, and it almost seems like it's created in Photoshop or it's CGI, but it is totally based in capturing what's actually in front of his camera. What I most admire about Ben is the way that he's always been interested in making a positive impact in the world, and he's loved figuring out how to do that in a myriad of epic ways. And I feel like that's what I've been trying to do with my work for years. And you know, it's a tricky world, trying to create something new that makes a difference in the world and hopefully moves the needle. And, you know, hopefully you'll hear that conversation in today's episode. I feel like we talk a lot about that, and we've got a great back and forth. And so I hope you enjoy it. My name is Brandon Harvey, and this is Sounds Good, the weekly podcast where we have conversations with inspiring people who are rejecting cynicism and using their lives to make an impact. Without any further ado, let's just jump straight into this conversation. I think that the last time I saw you, I crashed your boosted board into a car.
Something like that, yeah. But it came out undamaged.
It came out undamaged. I came out undamaged, but man, I have no idea how to drive a boosted board.
Have you gotten one since?
I have gotten on a few since. I have decided that purchasing one is probably not the best decision.
I've actually increased my collection to 4 now. So
What do you do with 4 boosted boards?
I take other people out on them.
There we go.
It's like a primary networking tool for me. I just feel it's so much more interesting to go to someone and be like, hey, do you want to go for an electric skateboard ride around the park together? We'll grab a coffee and, you know, hang out, as opposed to just saying, oh, let's get coffee, or let's meet at your office.
That's so cool.
Much more interactive.
Yeah, it's just a better experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating, man. When we met for the first time and when I crashed your boosted board, we were at Adobe Max, a conference in, I guess that year it was San Diego, because we both come from a photography background. You know, I don't do as much photography anymore. I do a little bit of photography. You are still 100% in the photography game. You are crushing it. But here's what I don't know. I don't know how you got started as a photographer. So maybe we can go back to, you know, the beginning of your time as a photographer. Where did that all come together?
Yeah, for sure. So I studied to be a hard rock mining engineer.
Wait, what does that mean?
So kind of like a dwarf, you know, mining gold, silver, metals. It's exactly what I was doing, but I was mostly so I studied mining engineering. So I was sitting in front of a computer for the most part, still going on to, you know, in different mines and checking things out.
Is that a good career choice? Like when I think about coal mining, I think about automation, killing, mining. Like, is it like that, or is it kind of a newer, better industry?
I mean, mining is dirty. You're in the middle of nowhere, you know, small mining towns. But you're surrounded by nature, right? So it sort of depends on like what you enjoy, like the type of lifestyle you like. Like if you're kind of a small community person and you just want to be outdoors every weekend, and you like the lifestyle of working really hard for a small period of time and then having, you know, time off. Like there are a number of my friends that were doing fly in, fly out. So they'll fly you in for anywhere between 3 to 5 weeks where you work, you know, 7 days a week. And then you have 2 to 3 weeks completely off to do whatever you want. And while you're on these locations, so you're not allowed to drink alcohol. You basically have nowhere to spend your money. So you just accumulate all this wealth. Then you go out and you're on vacation for 2-3 weeks. So it's sort of a lifestyle choice. For me, it wasn't a particular good fit.
And at what point did you realize that this wasn't a good fit for you?
Before I graduated, actually, I had a number of internships, and I just realized like being in the middle of nowhere, working on something I didn't care about was really not for me. I actually had a mild crisis. I I think 6 months before I was about to graduate. You know how like you go through school, and after elementary school it's middle school, after middle school it's high school, after high school it's university, and then suddenly there was nothing. It was work for the rest of my life, and I was like, holy crap, this is horrible. And I wanted to just not go to work and travel. And my parents, being good Asian parents, said that wasn't an option. And they said, well, you've gone through this 4 years of education. You might as well go and work. Go take a few months off and go have fun, but come back and get a job and figure it out. So that's what I did. I traveled, went to Taiwan, I think, came back and started working, worked 3.5 years and decided to quit. So how I came to that flow. So I picked up photography while I was stranded in a mine at one point. A girl broke up with me in November 2007. Bought my first camera, didn't know anything about photography. So I bought a point and shoot at Walmart and wanted to take pictures of stars. Needless to say, it didn't work out. So I had to return it, bought the most expensive camera there was in Walmart. That wasn't good enough too. It was like a Kodak Easy Share.
Yeah. Walmart doesn't have the best selection of great photo gear.
No, it didn't. But it was the biggest photo store in town because I was in this tiny mining town. So I returned that, and I had to drive like 3 hours to the next major city. Bought a camera, slept in my car, and took photos, and read the manual to start. So that's how I began. And photography was this companion for me in the beginning. Like it was sort of a friend that you could bring with you everywhere. It didn't matter if you didn't know anybody. If you were at a party and you didn't know anybody, you could still take pictures. It's a good conversation starter, a good excuse to hang out with people, go for a walk. It was also this sort of all access pass because now suddenly you could get invited to things that you would never get invited to otherwise. You could go backstage, you could, open up conversations with people and so forth. And so when I realized that I could make money having fun, so basically get paid to take pictures, I hopped into it and really just started developing this event photography business for a little while.
Really? So you got started really as an event photographer?
I did, yeah. It was just the easiest way to get more gear, and and I love gear, or I loved gear. Just this ability to constantly buy like the latest greatest stuff that I could afford, and I just upgraded pieces one at a time. And I was holding the engineering job in parallel, so engineering took care of life expenses, and my photography, every single dollar I earned in photography just went straight back into it, and it allowed me to grow really, really fast.
That's fascinating. And so it seems like you were passionate largely about the technical side of things and the way that those technical things gave you the ability to take more technical photos. But like event photography isn't very technical. When did you start bridging the gap into doing a little bit more technical stuff professionally?
So I think I'm really addicted to growth. Like I really love the idea of growing and growing efficiently. So you can grow linearly or you can grow exponentially. And photography is just one of those things, like when you first start out, like every like tiny new trick you learn makes your photography exponentially better. And so for like the beginning, like you get your first like wide aperture lens, or you get your first wide angle lens, or you get your first ND filter, or you learn HDR for the first time. Like you pick up these little tricks and suddenly like this whole new world unlocks for you. And I feel like that was really what drove me in the beginning. And then event photography was, the money side of it. And my transition from events to creative things, or more technical things, as you're calling them, was really a result of realizing that I had two jobs. So I was like, hey, I got my job as an engineer and I got this job as a photographer, but what happened to like the fun of photography? So that's when I actually shifted out of event photography and made a conscious effort to do creative photography. And the creative stuff began as a 365 project. One photo a day, every day, and make it awesome. Back in the days where Flickr was hot.
I know those days. That was how I got started too.
Yeah, so I did that. And if you're trying to create a cool photo every day, you got to find different ways to do that. And that's where I learned a lot of my Photoshop skills. It's just, I kind of ran out of time to go out and shoot people. So I had to shoot myself a lot. And then once I gave up the 365 after 100 days, I started investing more heavily into like studio equipment because I was like, okay, if I'm going to stop doing a photo a day, it's because I want to do larger, more complex things. And I'm going to need, larger, more complex gear to do it. And that's when like these, finding these bigger teams of like hair, makeup, model really started to begin around then.
Man, and let's talk a little bit about that period of work, because I think that's maybe where I first came to know your work, was when it became these really elaborate, bigger team photos you were creating. You were creating not just photos, but experiences. And I would imagine also your job expanded from just being a photographer to also being an art director and to some degree a set builder, because these photos are just massive and intricate. Like, can you describe one or two of those early shoots just to give the listeners an idea of like how intense these photos were?
I mean, I don't see my work that way, so it's
Really,
kind of
really.
interesting to. I
Sorry to
think
project.
so. I mean, I've been a full-time photographer now for about 5 years or 6 years now. Because I quit my job in 2012, and even a year or two prior to that, I was already doing sets. So it's actually taken like a really long time to build up to where I am today. So the interesting thing is if you go on Flickr and you look for Von Wong, you can go all the way back to 2008 and see the evolution of photographs. And I think in the beginning, they were very much, standard, do something really cool with a model, hair, makeup, and so forth. So very fashiony. But then things started getting really interesting when I started experimenting with special effects. So lighting people on fire, getting people like knights in shining armor and horses in a village, or taking flour and having dancers throw it around, or covering a person in liquid latex. So like I think when I started to venture more in practical effects was when I started getting this pseudo reputation online for being the guy who was a little bit crazy. And then I just never stopped, because this is kind of the problem with the internet, right? They always expect you to one up yourself.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of trapped in this cycle, which, for better or for worse, pushes you to do bigger, crazier things. And so I think to get to where I was today wasn't this linear progression, but rather just, keep adding one layer, like what can I do more this time? What can I do crazier that time? And sometimes it would be a complete flop. Like I have videos online where I tried lighting people on fire and failed.
Wait. You failed?
Yeah, like the guy wouldn't burn. Turns out if you don't put the right stuff on the person, he just won't light up on fire properly. It's a thing.
And for a lot of this stuff, you're kind of showcasing, you're also making videos behind the scenes showing the process of your creation of these things. Kind of, maybe that's like what's fueling that internet love, is people being able to see some of the context behind the scenes.
I learned very early on that if I shared the process of how I do things, that same image that I captured would get that much more traction, because suddenly it wasn't just a pretty photo anymore. It was a process. And so every single piece of content that I create usually has a behind the scene video that goes with it. And I've always tried to make that video useful to the people watching. So what's shifted the most over time has actually been the target audience. Like when I first started out, my goal was to be seen on photography blogs. And so my material was very educational. And then as I started getting bored of the technical and shifted off into inspirational, I started really focusing on this idea of, being able to pursue your passions as a creative. And then once that got a little bit boring too, then I really started focusing on these greater purposes, like these impact stories that I currently have. So, but at the end of the day, like there's always been documentation of it. It's just that the focus and the way I told those stories changed.
I like this idea actually that maybe, if you were to keep on making those same photography tutorial style videos, they would continue to be valuable and effective for you, but your passion on them had kind of run dry. And you're like, the best way I can create things that, move the needle is to actually lean into the things that inspire me, the things that are of interest to me. Because I've largely done the same thing. Like, I could probably have a much more sustainable career if I was back doing some of the early photography stuff I was doing. But it just, it lost its luster for me. And for me, I if I'm doing something unique and interesting, I'd like to just continue to follow my passions and let that lead me into, whatever it is I'm doing now.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things to try to keep in mind is to never be a slave to your own creation, right? Like there are so many creatives that I've encountered who they get stuck in this cycle. So let's say they're creating educational content and now their income depends on it, and now they're stuck creating that all the time, or they've designed a style for something that they can't escape because nobody cares about anything else they do, so they have to do the same thing over and over again. And so I've always made sure to like prioritize my own personal interests first and then my followers second, which hasn't always gone over well. I think that I could have a significantly more successful social presence if I stayed more consistent. But like this desire really to just have the freedom to pursue something that you really believe in, I think is kind of important, because as a creative, it's sort of your strongest weapon. Like if you get bored of what you do, you lose everything.
Yeah. And ultimately, like, people want to follow you because you've got a point of view, because you've got passions and ideas. And I think following you would lose some of its magic if you were just kind of sharing the same thing and if it felt kind of like it was coming out of a lab more than it was coming out of like a human with a heart.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know. You can't really control what others do, right? I can't control why people follow me. I can have an idea of what it is, but at the end of the day, like, I can control what I create and why I do it and the messages I choose to focus on. And so I don't know why people follow me. I think there's a plethora of reasons. I've done like surveys in the past to try to figure out, like, are they more in it for the impact stories? Are they more in it for the adventure? Is it just for the inspiration, or is it for the entertainment or the comedy? Like, what is it? And everyone has a different answer. It's just like when you show someone your portfolio, like, everyone has a different favorite. And so it's almost like I can spend my time trying to please everybody, or I can just go and do the best I can with what I have, with this greater mission of making sure to provide something of value to people's lives and believing in that and pursuing it, and then letting people sort of taper off because it no longer resonates with them, or latch on even tighter because it's now become something greater than the final result.
I just wanted to take a quick break from this conversation to tell you about the sponsor of this week's episode of Sounds Good, Hover. So I've been using Hover domains to host my websites, brandonharvey.com, goodgoodgood.co, all kinds of other domains for years. If you've been listening to the podcast for a little bit, you know this. I love to gab about Hover because I genuinely use it and love it. If I go and check hover.com, okay, here's I have 24 domain names registered with Hover. That's a lot. That's amazing. And I love it. Their platform is easy and simple to use. They're a trusted brand when it comes to my privacy, and they offer hundreds of extensions to choose from. I want you to put your passion online in the same way I have with Hover. Just go to hover.com/soundsgood for 10% off your first purchase. Again, that's hover.com/soundsgood. You get 10% off your first purchase, and you show your support for this podcast. Also, for all aspiring or serial entrepreneurs, we've got some information on a really great conference that you can totally attend. The event is Fireside Conference, and Hover is a proud sponsor. It's an off-the-grid, invite-only event taking place a few hundred clicks north of Toronto the weekend after Labor Day. The conference is packed with VCs, startups, tech enthusiasts, and more. If this is you, then check them out at firesideconf.com. That's firesideconf.com. Get your website launched with Hover and be prepared to pitch your awesome business at Fireside Conference this year. Okay, now back to the rest of the conversation. Let's talk a little bit about your transition to doing more impact-driven work, because this is probably right around the point that I met you. You'd maybe been doing this for a little while, and I was immediately drawn to the way that you've done this. And this is the thing that I paid the most attention to over the last few years. I don't know. It's really remarkable and really inspiring. Tell me about that intentional choice to kind of pursue this new type of content.
Yeah. So I've always been interested in, having a positive impact in the world. And I've done it in a number of different ways. Initially, it was like teaching. So giving back and sharing all this knowledge for free to different photographers. And then after that, it was a little bit more inspirational to get people to quit their jobs. And whenever I had some charity projects or so forth that came up, I'd always pick them up, and document the process. So there was this fan I surprised for his 21st birthday who was chronically ill. There was a girl with terminal cancer who wanted a photo shoot for her funeral. So I helped her do that. And I've made fundraising videos for different charities. It's never been sort of what I do. It's always been like the thing I do on my spare time.
Yeah.
So as a creative, for the longest time, my goal was just make it as a creative. Like, wouldn't it be amazing to get paid to do what you do best? That was kind of the goal. And I kind of got there. I had a few global campaigns and they paid super well, but I wasn't really that proud of what I had created. It didn't resonate with me. Like it wasn't like, oh, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. It was more of a, oh, that's it. That's what I've been working for kind of a thing. And so it really forced me to reevaluate like where I wanted to go. Like what was I going to pursue for the next 10 years? And I came to the realization that the work that I created, while it was really cool and it had really inspirational videos, the photos themselves didn't have a purpose. Like the work at its core didn't have a mission to it. The story of how I got there had the lessons, but the result itself didn't have it. But since I was a photographer that created these worlds, I didn't really know how to tie like the impact world and the fantastical world together, because social impact for the most part, when you look at it, is like all these documentaries of horrifying situations and so forth. And my work is very much airy-fairy and very, very fantastical. And so finding the intersection of how can this fantasy world intersect this like really grimy, dark kind of documentary, like the sad reality world, like how do these two work together? And that was something that I was really stuck on. And so it reached the point where I almost quit photography and went off to make fundraising videos, only for me to realize that I wasn't actually as great of a filmmaker as I was of a photographer. And the journey or the time investment that it would take to become great was just something that didn't strike me as particularly efficient. So I was talking about how important exponential growth was for me. And starting back at, let's say, zero, more or less, just didn't seem efficient. And so I just kind of pattered around trying different things. And it was only until my girlfriend convinced me to go storm chasing that I managed to create my first sort of intersection of impact and fantasy.
Maybe we should back up for a second and say, it's remarkable that your girlfriend convinced you to go storm chasing. I feel like anybody who does storm chasing, their significant others are like, let's maybe not do this. This is a bad idea. And you had to kind of get dragged into doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to go, but I didn't want to go just for fun. And I didn't want to go and put a model in front of it. But my girlfriend just wanted to experience it. She thought it would be really cool, but I had no interest in just doing something fun and cool. And so she said, well, why don't you just use storm as a metaphor for climate change and create something there? And so I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Why not? Why don't we just go ahead and do it? And because she knows that if I set my mind to something, it tends to happen. So the minute the concept was, I guess, pseudo approved, we found a storm chaser called Kelly DeLay within like, I think 3 weeks. And a fan who had an ambulance came along with us so we could store a ton of things in his like retrofitted ambulance. And we just went storm chasing for 2 weeks to create the series. And and that was like the first, so like the series isn't my best work, but it was that first time where I could see the intersection of fantasy and impact sort of like hit. And that was like what, 3 years ago now?
Wow.
And that's sort of like what really kickstarted it. And since then it's just been every single project that I've done, that I've released, has an impact component to it. And I guess I want to take some time and talk about how hard it was to shift.
Yeah.
Because I did wake up one morning and said, this is what I'm going to do. But actually doing it wasn't easy. So I had assumed that, when I made a big announcement, like I made a blog post about it, has this official announcement that I was going to take a year off and not do any work that didn't have social impact. My strategy was to go out to all these nonprofits and make this offer of just working with them to do whatever they wanted, no strings attached. That was the offer. And I thought that, people would bite. Hey, you get this guy who would come and offer his not only a great photo shoot, but this ability to make things go viral and raise money and get views and all this stuff that I was really good at. I expected people to come flocking in, and that didn't happen. Actually, no one really understood what I wanted to do. I probably didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do either. And when I started releasing these projects, it turns out that a lot of photographers also didn't really care about these new impact things that I was working on. They just wanted more tips and tricks to improve their career, because that was the following that I had fostered. And all the companies that supported me were kind of annoyed because I wasn't making the educational material that was helping them sell gear. And so, there's this really tough shift of just where I was headed and for everyone else to catch up to it. But like I was saying a little earlier, it didn't really matter. I knew where I wanted to go, and I had this vision of what it could become, and I just kind of rolled with it. So now 3 years down the line, it's been really interesting, because while I think there are still a bunch of people that wish I, had more tutorials and stuff, and they'll vocalize it, the fans that were already fans of what I did before are now bigger fans. So I had lost people along the way, but the ones that stayed have become even stronger supporters.
They believe in the mission, which is so much deeper than just oh, I like photography tips.
Yeah. And it's been the reverberations of it. I think people have started looking for opportunities to infuse their work with impact. And it wasn't the fact that I had done it once, it's the fact that I kind of did it over and over and over and over again. And people are just oh, it's possible to do this. There aren't just one-offs. There is the possibility of building this, let's say, business model or kind of come up with a structure to focus on having an impact. And even if they don't always care about the same things that I do, I can't say that a lot of the followers are environmentalists to start with. They really think it's amazing that I've sort of found a way to make an impact. And so they don't try to do environmental projects themselves. They try to tackle the issues that they believe in, using what I do as a little bit of just knowing that it's possible, I think is what's important to them. And I'm guessing it's probably the same for you.
Yeah, for me, it's been a really interesting process of kind of transitioning to doing this kind of work. And for me, it was never putting my stake in the ground and saying, this is what I do now, or I'm going to do this for a year. It was a slow and steady process of me, similar to you, just trying to figure out what I was passionate about and continuing to follow that. And it just led to, I was living in downtown Portland, Oregon, and there's a bunch of nonprofits there. And I was just, I'd be walking around and I would just bump into people who worked for nonprofits, and they'd be like, oh, we need photos for this thing. And I'd be like, oh, I can volunteer to do that. Or I can, I'll get paid to do that, but I'll take a little bit of a pay cut. And I just started doing that to a point where not only was I finding that I was really passionate about it, but I was also becoming a bit of an expert in the world of telling stories of, making a difference in people's lives without manipulating the people whose stories were being told. That was something I learned really, really early on. You go on a trip to Africa and you're not using the people and the stories that you meet to get donations. You figure out a way to communicate their story in a way that brings their humanness more to the forefront, so that you want to respond by supporting, their humanity, not by saying, oh, they're poor and they need help. It's no, this person is ambitious and talented and, has a bright future ahead of them. They just have a few roadblocks that we can all work together on to get rid of, and so I just started getting really energized by leaning into that and figuring out how I can continue to do this. And then I just hit a point where, basically clients and brands would reach out to me and want to be working together. And I would basically say, we could work together, but I only accept a limited number of campaigns a year. And this isn't as interesting to me as if we were to do some sort of social impact component to this. Have you thought about partnering with, this organization or this organization? And maybe we do the campaign around your support for them because it's really in line with your mission or your values. And I was able to start pivoting a lot of my normal work into things that had a social impact component, even though that's not how the pitch came originally. And so for me, it was this slow and steady process. But, and with my audience, I kind of found the same thing. There were some people who were so on board and passionate about this and so excited. And then a lot of other people who were like, I kind of liked it when you posted photos of the ocean more. Or like, I kind of wish you would just like do a waterfall with an inspirational quote. And, that's fine. Like that I'm losing a little bit of people.
You had a demand, well, at least with the work side of things, you had a demand first.
Yeah.
Whereas I had no demand. I just made a decision and I was like, oh crap. So I think you had the better strategy.
Well, I mean,
you built something that people wanted and then let it flow. I just went like, all right, I'm doing this and I'll figure it out along.
Well, I will say though that the work doesn't come as consistently as it used to. I think that transition period was the best, where people were like, "Oh yeah, you're this old person. You're doing this old style of work," and I'm like, "No, I do this new style, but we can still work together." And now, it's a little bit harder to, bridge that gap. But for me, just like you were saying earlier, like following that passion and this idea that my work should have some sort of impact to it and that maybe I have the ability to move the needle, like all of that drives me so much more than a follower count or, I'm at the amount of dollars in my bank account, all of those things. It is a complicated thing. And it's certainly a thing that I'm able to kind of wrestle with because I have a certain level of privilege where, I'm not going to like, if I totally fail financially, like I'm not going to end up on the street. It's a risk that I can take and not everybody can take. But because I have the privilege to take it, I feel an obligation to.
Cool. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely have the same privilege. Like I have a good family. If I end up one day with nothing, I can always go back home, got a roof over my head. I've built up savings thanks to having my engineering career in the past. And so I had the opportunity to have a runway and an education. On top of that, I just don't have kids, right? Like, so yeah. There's so many people I know that have families and they just can't take those risks. I really like what you just said about saying like you have privilege. So now you're obligated to, use it in service of others. I've never heard that before. And I think it's really cool. I like that a lot.
Thanks, man. And I love the way that you've done that. Like, I think that you have said, I've got this audience. I have this unique ability to drive interest and views and engagement on digital content. And I have a fantastic ability to shoot photos in a way that nobody else can. It's really unique. And you have said, I'm going to dedicate my time and attention and passions and abilities toward, specifically environmentalism. And maybe we should actually dive in. Can you tell me about like one of your favorite projects you've done that's highlighted this thing? Because, and hopefully people will go and watch, some of your videos on YouTube later because they're fantastic. But what's one of your favorites that you brought together to kind of communicate this message?
Yeah, so I think one of my favorites was putting a mermaid on 10,000 plastic bottles. I think as far as story goes and quality of images, it's been one of the most successful ones that I've ever done. It happened completely randomly because my mom found a mermaid tail designer while she was hunting for someone to fix my sister's wedding dress. So it's like the most random of occurrences.
That's so funny.
But this commitment to it saying like, I want to do something with impact made me think of like, oh, well, how can I shoot a mermaid? And so plastics in the ocean is a pretty big topic. And so I just kind of fused the two together. Video ended up getting 37, 38, or maybe it's at, I don't know how many millions of views it is at so far, which is pretty cool. And that's just on the native video. So not all the cuts and TV features and all the rest are completely separate from that, which is pretty amazing. So I don't know. I think that's probably one of my highlights in terms of impact to quality of image ratio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how you are with your campaigns or your work. I have this problem where I directly correlate success of a project and quality of the project to its reach. and I don't think that's always accurate.
Yeah.
But it's one that I'm trying to kind of separate from
Yeah.
and focus a little bit more on depth of impact as opposed to breadth.
And I mean, depth of impact is because I went to school for marketing and advertising. So like when I was in my marketing research class or whatever, you talk about this idea of qualitative data and quantitative data. And quantitative data, like the number of people you reached or the amount of minutes that were watched or the amount of engagement that you got, all of that is super easy to calculate and compare and put in a spreadsheet. But qualitative data is the stuff that is so much harder to measure, but I think that's what matters. And so for me, like I measure the success of a project by the DMs that I get or the number of people who email me a year later and say, I'm still thinking about this. And, that's obviously not going to fly in measuring things for like a client every time, but like that's what I do it for. But maybe there's a little bit of a balance to be found between the two.
Agreed. I think finding the balance between the two is important. I'm trying to see myself as more of an artist and less of a marketer these days. I think it gets really tiring to always have to sell what you do, which would be the role of a marketer, because you got to keep up with the trends. You always got to, figure out what these algorithms are doing, so on and so forth. Whereas the artist instead will focus a little more on just creating really great stuff. And I think I've spent a lot of time on the marketing side, and I'd like to start thinking just more about creating really great things, letting the storytelling and the marketing part of it take on a little more organic of a role.
This might be going back to like the marketing side of things, but I wrote down this quote from one of your videos where you said, how do you get somebody to talk about something ordinary, ugly, and boring? I love that in many ways, that's what you've been able to do. Like, I think talking about the environment is such a difficult thing. Like, so at Good Good Good, my company that celebrates the good in the world, we actually are members of 1% for the planet. And so, we give 1% of our total revenue from our sales of the Good newspaper to combat, climate change and to support environmental impact. And, we just thought that was a really important thing because in our newspaper all day long, we're highlighting the stories of people creating, solutions to problems that are sometimes sexy, oftentimes not sexy, but like, there's a lot of things that are like, oh, this is happening now and it's popular or interesting, or at least you can put kind of more of a story to it. But the environment is so tricky because it's something that will just slowly impact our lives for decades and ultimately impact our grandchildren's lives and their grandchildren's lives. And so it's a hard thing to get people to talk about, but I love that you are very intentionally making this something that is something that you can talk about. You're putting a photo and a story to this idea that feels very vague and very far off and very much like it doesn't impact you on a direct level.
So yeah, the funny thing is that like I actually suffer with the complete opposite problem. So I'd love to tackle more human stories. And I have done a few, but it's just not that suitable for my medium because you can make a fantasy problem out of the environment, but you can't like fantasize human suffering unless you're going through it yourself. So for example, if I made a series around depression, that was my interpretation of depression as opposed to my personal experience, people get really offended. Same could be said about any kind of abuse or violence or so on and so forth. Like to make fantasy out of that, I think goes down really, really badly.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's a good little nuanced understanding of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe so you go for a more documentary approach. So the human stories are like perfect. And then I'm on the flip side. I'm like, I have to make something really like crazy out of it. And it just doesn't fly so well. Well,
we make a good team. We balance each other out. This is good. This is really good.
There you go. Together we make one.
Together we make one competent photographer.
There you go.
Man, yeah, this is fascinating. I love that you have been able to go down this unique route in line with your passions, abilities, talents, and interests. It sounds like your career has evolved and shifted even just over the last 5 years. What do you think is kind of next for you?
So the next step is going to be really interesting. So we actually reconnected because you appeared on my email newsletter for this this book called Story Brand, and it talks about, so like the one single biggest highlight of that book for me was the fact that when most people tell their stories, and this is applicable for humans, for brands, or anything, they always portray themselves as the hero, and that the more efficient thing to do would be to portray themselves as a guide and let the viewers be the hero. And that's something that stuck so strongly in my mind, because with the work that I do, I'm always the hero. Like, I am the center of attention, the guy who's coming up with this crazy idea and executing it. And there's very little opportunity for others to be the hero, because they're not going to create these crazy photography projects on the evenings and weekends. They're probably not going to quit their jobs to, do this stuff. Like, so at the end of the day, like, what I create, although it's really great at attracting attention and, having a little bit of this inspirational component, like, people can really only share. There's very little opportunity for them to get involved. And that's something that really bothers me about my work, and a problem that I've been really struggling to solve. And now if I combine that with the shift in digital, and I think we've all felt it, there's so much content happening. It's all getting better, which is great because there's more good content out there than ever before, but it's also more competitive than ever before. It's harder to get your stuff seen. So if you want to be a content creator today, you almost have to follow these very strict rules of posting extremely regularly, following the formats of what the algorithms prefer. And I've just noticed lately how hard it is for me to consistently reach an audience, regardless of the quality of work, because no matter how good the piece of content is, its half-life on the internet from an algorithmic perspective is extremely short. Like, it'll last between 24 hours to a week, at which case it just sort of decays because it's no longer new. And the algorithms need to favor newer, fresher content all the time. So because I'm in the impact space and because I create things to have an impact, if people aren't seeing what I do, then I'm not having an impact, right? So everything that I create right now is extremely transient. And I think that's the case for every single piece of digital content. And that's something that bothers me. If I take these two problems, the fact that I don't want to be the hero and the fact that digital content is on the decline from a durability perspective as well as a reach perspective, I think the next step for me will be to shift into the physical space and make my work more accessible to people in a physical way. So if these worlds that I currently create, these crazy sets and installations, can be something that can be publicly viewable, where anyone could go in and model inside of, or shoot themselves inside of, or be a part of, so that they can have the opportunity to use that as their profile picture or their image, so that they can talk about the things that they care about. I think that's going to be the next step. So I solve the hero problem, I solve the digital decay problem, and I leverage all the pieces that I currently already have. So we'll see how it goes.
Dude, I'm pumped about that. Let me know how I can support that, because I think, first of all, I love that you're seeing a problem in the world and you're saying, I want to solve this. And then you're saying, you know what, there's also a problem that makes it more difficult for me to solve this. Therefore, I'm going to solve that as well. And you're creating an experience that allows people to join in and become a part of that solution as well by fully feeling and experiencing, this environment you're creating. And so I've got no clue what this is going to look like, but I'm pumped. That's cool. That's like energizing for me.
Yeah, I don't know either, but like, I love these reinvention opportunities. Like, I am going to make so many mistakes coming out. It's going to cost me so much money. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but it's going to work, because, so here's the funny thing, right? I don't know if you have the same experience. But I've always felt like if you set a destination in mind and like that's like your goal and you just keep walking towards it, the question isn't whether or not you're going to get there. It's just how long it's going to take and how many mistakes are you going to make along the way. And so like, whether or not it's a good idea is a completely separate conversation. But like, if you just keep your head down and walk that direction, like you eventually get there, and it's, for better or for worse. And that's sort of like what I got going for me right now. And I think what's really revitalizing more than anything else is the excitement. Like I just feel really excited about this idea, and my projects, as fun as they are, have gotten a little bit redundant. It's a little bit of the same, always different, but it's kind of similar. And so this whole new world to discover and sort of conquer, if you will, it's just really interesting and really fun.
There are so many things that I admire and respect about Ben, but most specifically, his belief that if you have a destination in mind and you keep walking towards it, then it's not a question of whether or not you'll get there. It's simply a matter of time before you arrive where your passion is taking you. Man, after listening to this conversation, I hope that your curiosity is piqued about Ben's current and past work. If you're just finding out about him, you should absolutely follow him on Instagram at Wong. And to get a little bit more of an inside look at how his work is made, make sure to search for him on YouTube. And lastly, make sure to check out his website for his collection as a whole. If you're new to Sounds Good, we would love for you to stick around. If you like this episode, you'd also love my conversation with Eric Holthaus and my conversation with Stephen Ken. Both of these guests are paving the way for using their craft and skill for global impact. You can find both of these episodes and more than 100 other episodes by searching for Sounds Good wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and even YouTube, which is weird, but like people do that. People listen on YouTube, and you can too. Anyway, this podcast is created by me, Brandon Harvey, as a part of Good, 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 a community that believes in the power of celebrating good news and becoming good news. Chad Mackles-Snavely and the team at CM Studio edit and mix the show, and Christy Karenbrock offers production support. You can get lots of helpful stories on social media by following us everywhere at GoodGoodGoodCO. And the Good 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 team is a small team, but we are real people who are simply trying to do the best we can to spread good news. And we love seeing the good newspaper being sold or given away in cafes and shops and businesses and hospitals around the country. If you want the good newspaper in your neighborhood, or you own a business that would like to carry good news, please contact our team. Email us at wholesale@goodgoodgood.co, and make sure to see what else we do at goodgoodgood at goodgoodgood.co. And on that note, that is a wrap for this week's episode. Go out and remember Ben's words. Your passion for your craft is your greatest weapon in life. Next week, we'll be back with another inspiring story from an incredible person. Sound good?